The wind tastes of dust and sweat. The sun hasn't yet risen above the cragged ridges of northern China, but a line of figures already stirs beneath the shadows of what will become one of humanity's most enduring monuments, the Great Wall of China. Our story today doesn't focus on emperors or generals. It's not about dynastic struggles or epic battles. Today, we walk in the sandals of someone rarely remembered in the grand sweep of history, a laborer, a builder, a single man who woke up one morning to haul stone and tamp earth beneath the eyes of imperial overseers. Today, we live one day with him. He's awake before the sun. That isn't unusual. No one here has the luxury of sleeping past dawn. He is one of thousands conscripted to work on the wall, a defensive colossus that stretches across mountains and deserts like a stone serpent. The year is around 215 BCE. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, has recently unified the warring states, and his vision is ambitious, ruthless, and absolute. The northern tribes, especially the Xiongnu, threaten the fragile stability of the empire. And to stop them, the emperor commands a wall. Not a single continuous wall, that's a myth born centuries later, but a network of fortifications built atop the ruins of older regional walls. And that patchwork must be rebuilt, connected, fortified. That's where our builder comes in. He isn't a soldier. He isn't even a volunteer. He's a farmer, or was until a local official under imperial orders conscripted him. Maybe he was accused of a minor crime. Maybe his taxes were too high and unpaid. Or maybe his village drew the short straw in the local recruitment lottery. Either way, he's here now, and he'll stay until the overseers say he can go if he survives. His day begins with silence. There are no morning rituals beyond shuffling to the communal fire pit where yesterday's rice porridge is reheated with water and a pinch of salt, if salt can be spared. He eats quickly, if grimly. Hunger isn't a distant threat. It walks beside every worker here. Supplies are slow to arrive, and the terrain is unforgiving. The closest supply caravan is still days away, and some men have already died of exhaustion, dysentery, or wounds from hauling stones that were never meant to be carried by bare hands. The worksite is alive by first light. Overseers shout commands in harsh, clipped tones. They don't speak like teachers or foremen, they speak like soldiers because they are soldiers. Many are veterans of the unification wars, now given power over civilian conscripts. The whip is their answer to disobedience. Sometimes it's their answer to nothing at all. Our builder knows better than to speak or complain. He joins his work crew, 50 men today, all stripped to the waist despite the morning chill. Baskets of earth and stone are already waiting. The wall isn't just built from stone blocks. Large sections, especially in the early periods, are made using tamped earth, a labor-intensive process that requires constant shoveling, hauling, packing, and shaping. He shoulders a basket. It weighs over 40 pounds. His legs tremble, but they move, they always move. The labor is endless, repetitive, grueling. Baskets are hauled from the quarry pit to the wall face. Earth is dumped into wooden frames, then tamped down with heavy wooden poles. One layer, then another, and another. Men rotate between hauling, tamping, and frame setting. There is no room for idleness. If one man falters, the team slows. And if the team slows, the overseers notice. Around mid-morning, the sun is high and relentless. Sweat drips into his eyes. His back is raw from the friction of the rope that holds the basket against his skin. Already, blisters have burst along his palms. He doesn't stop. He can't. There are rumors of men who stopped to rest and were buried in the wall itself, a warning, they say, or maybe just a cruel joke. There's no way to tell what's true anymore. By midday, the crews are allowed a brief break. They sit in the shade of the half-formed wall, breathing heavily. Water is passed around in shared jugs. Food, if available, is stale millet cakes. There's no meat, no fruit, no luxury. Only enough to keep the body moving. They speak little. The sound of pickaxes, carts, and shouts echo over the valley. Somewhere, a stone tumbles down a slope, followed by a man's scream. No one rushes to check. If he's alive, someone will drag him back. If not, they'll fill the gap in the line with another laborer. But what's truly brutal about this day isn't the heat, or the hunger, or even the danger, it's the scale. The wall seems to stretch forever. Every time a section rises, the line of workers is moved further along the ridge. They know they are building something massive. But they don't know how massive. They don't know they're contributing to what will one day be called one of the greatest architectural feats in human history. They just know that they are tired, and tomorrow will be the same. The afternoon labor resumes without ceremony. The light is harsher now. The wind kicks dust into every corner of skin. The wall, layer by layer, rises slowly. Maybe 6 feet today if they're lucky. A man next to our builder collapses from heatstroke. The crew is allowed 5 minutes to move him to the side. If he can't walk tomorrow, he'll be sent back to camp. If he still can't walk after 3 days, he'll be left behind. Mercy isn't a currency that spends well here. By dusk, the light fades. Finally, a signal is shouted, the workday is over. Not finished. Just paused. The crew staggers back to camp. They are bone-tired, barely able to lift their arms. There's no wash basin, no medicine, no relief. Just a half-cooked stew, a threadbare mat of straw, and the night wind howling across the open hills. He lays down, staring at the stars. No one sings. No one tells stories. Sleep comes fast and dreamless. The overseers will wake them again before sunrise. And yet, in the quiet, beneath the cold breath of the night, something stirs that even he doesn't understand. He is not a hero. He will never be named. But brick by brick, wall by wall, he is reshaping the world. If you've made it this far, you're probably not the kind of person who backs away from long, uncomfortable history. And that's exactly why you should subscribe. There's more ahead and it only gets deeper. Morning comes again like a threat, not a gift. The call to rise is shouted before the sky even changes color. And our builder, whose name history never recorded, drags himself out of the straw bedding that barely kept the cold at bay. His limbs ache from the day before, but pain is no longer foreign. It's familiar now, predictable, like the sound of the guards pacing outside the tents, the rasp of a dull saw on wood, or the creak of cartwheels arriving with new stone. No one questions why they're here anymore. That phase of rebellion, of outrage, passed weeks ago. Now there's only endurance. And in that endurance, there is a strange kind of clarity. The wall doesn't ask questions. It doesn't flatter or lie. It only rises when hands bleed. But even in this daily cycle of toil, there is a rigid hierarchy. One that dictates everything from who eats first to who carries the heaviest loads. Overseers stand at the top, many of them former soldiers or minor nobility rewarded with postings in remote areas. Beneath them are engineers, skilled artisans who understand the weight and alignment of stones, who draw plans into the dirt and bark orders in sharp, impatient bursts. Then there are foremen who watch the laborers and keep the crews moving. And at the bottom, the conscripts, the lifeblood, the builders. Most of them didn't choose this life. Many are peasants who couldn't pay taxes. Others are criminals sentenced to hard labor. Some are political prisoners, men who spoke against the emperor's sweeping reforms. And then there are the debtors, the exiled, the desperate. Our builder could be any one of these, or all of them. It doesn't matter. Out here, identity erodes. Only labor survives. By the time the sun peaks, the work has turned cruel again. Today, the section they're building lies along a ridge where the mountain narrows. It's a strategic point, a bottleneck against raids. That means more stone, less earth. Tamped earth was easier in some ways, though no part of this ever felt easy. But stone must be shaped, aligned, lifted. And they don't have cranes or pulleys. Not really. A few rudimentary devices exist, wooden sledges, hand winches, levers made from thick timber. But most of it is still raw manpower. Ropes and backs, bones and effort. The stones come from nearby quarries, dragged up the slope by teams of 6 or more men. They work barefoot to keep grip on the uneven surface. Every few meters, one of them slips, skin scraping off against jagged ground. Blood stains the stones before they're ever placed in the wall. Once a stone arrives at the top, it must be leveled and set into position. The engineers inspect each one, adjusting with wedges of wood or slivers of broken tile. Mortar, when available, is a slurry of lime and clay mixed by foot in wide basins. The smell of it sticks to the skin long after the sun goes down. But what's harder than any single task is the repetition. The mind starts to blur. Hours pass without meaning. 100 stones placed, and still the wall looms half-built. The worksite stretches far in both directions. Hundreds of men, dozens of sites, all synchronized like the parts of a vast living machine. A machine fueled by punishment, hunger, and fear. Still, despite the suffering, something else begins to take root. Something stranger. Pride. Not pride in the overseers or in the emperor's grand vision. Not in the cruelty of forced labor, but in the wall itself. The structure is beginning to feel real beneath their hands. Solid, immense, permanent. And our builder begins to realize something that even the Empire's architects didn't fully understand. They aren't just defending the frontier. They're leaving behind a mark, a scar in the land that says, "We were here, we endured." As the sun begins to dip once again, the temperature drops sharply. Northern China doesn't give soft evenings. Wind cuts across the ridges like a blade. Dust swirls through half-built battlements. Men cough, not just from the cold, but from breathing in dirt and lime all day. Their throats are raw, their eyes red, but still they keep placing stones. That night, back in camp, they are given a rare moment of respite. A traveling officer inspecting the project for the imperial court has arrived. In his honor, the workers receive a bit more food. Not much, an extra scoop of grain, maybe. But even this small mercy reminds them that they are seen, at least for now. They don't speak to the officer. He doesn't address them directly. His presence is distant, symbolic. He carries scrolls, not tools. His robes are too clean to ever have known the taste of stone dust. But even he, perhaps, is impressed by the scope of what he sees. The wall rises like the spine of some ancient dragon, twisting over mountains and valleys in a line that stretches beyond the eye's reach. Later, as the men drift into sleep, our builder lies awake for a moment longer. He stares into the darkness and wonders, will anyone remember us? Will anyone ever know what this cost? The answer is, maybe not. But the wall will remain. Long after the emperors fall, long after the dynasties burn and the maps change, the wall will stand. And though his name will never be known, his work will. If this vision of ancient sweat, stone, and survival speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe. Because this is just one story carved into the past. And there are thousands more waiting. Winter changes everything. Where the dust once clung to sweat-soaked skin, now frost coats every surface. The dry winds that once carried grit now slice across the mountains like knives, turning skin brittle and lips cracked. Work doesn't stop in the cold. The emperor's orders do not bow to seasons. And so the builders continue in thinner rations with stiffer hands under the same weight of stone and silence. Our builder wakes beneath a canvas tent that does little to block the cold. His breath clouds the air in white bursts as he sits up, already shivering. There are no fires in the sleeping tents, which is too scarce. The only warmth comes from bodies packed close together, and even that fades as soon as the morning call comes. His first step onto the frozen ground sends a jolt of pain up his legs. The soles of his feet have split open in places, the cold prying apart old blisters. There's no medicine. The closest thing to healing is a tightly wound rag or the grit to keep walking. Some men smear mud or ash onto wounds, a kind of folk protection. But infections spread easily here. Even minor cuts can turn fatal. Despite the freezing air, work resumes as always. The stones are harder to move in winter. Snow gathers on the slopes, making the paths slick and treacherous. More than once, men lose their footing and fall. Some survive. Some don't. One slip on a loaded sledge can mean a broken spine, a crushed ribcage. The dead are not sent home. They are buried nearby, often in shallow graves dug in frozen earth, sometimes in the very foundations of the wall they were building. It's a quiet kind of death, the kind that doesn't make it into history books. The camp has no ceremony for the fallen. No rites. No names carved into wood. Only a muttered curse under breath or a short glance from the men still working. Mourning is dangerous here. It slows the line. And slowing the line draws attention. The punishments are brutal. Whipping is common, not just for disobedience but for perceived laziness. Stealing food can mean execution. Talking back to an overseer is worse. Some are tied to posts in the cold and left overnight. Others are simply beaten until unconscious. The threat of death hangs like smoke over every movement. And yet, even in this frozen brutality, resistance festers. Not the loud, flag-waving kind of rebellion that would be crushed before it ever took form, but a quieter kind. Tools accidentally dropped down the cliffs. Buckets spilled. Baskets poorly packed. Stones misplaced just enough to slow progress. A shared glance between men before forgetting to secure a lever. Sabotage masked as incompetence. It's risky, but in a world where you own nothing, not your time, your labor, or even your body, the smallest act of defiance becomes a statement. A whisper against tyranny. And while no one dares speak of rebellion openly, the tension is growing. Sometimes there are actual mutinies. The records, usually imperial scrolls written to justify crackdowns, speak of work camps that erupted in sudden violence. Crews that turned on their overseers, killing them with hammers and chisels before fleeing into the mountains. Most were hunted down within days. But the fact that it happened at all is proof even the most crushed spirits can still burn. Our builder doesn't speak of revolt. He doesn't dream of escape. But he notices the way the others look over their shoulders more often now. How they whisper at night when the guards are too far away. Something's building. And it's not just the wall. Still, most of them endure. Not because they believe in the Emperor's glory. Not because they're afraid, but because somewhere deep beneath the layers of suffering, there's hope or maybe just habit. The human instinct to survive. To make it one more day. And so, the work continues. Even as snow turns to ice, even as boots freeze to ankles, even as bones break and hands go numb, the wall rises. Foot by foot. Stone by stone. Death by death. And in the Empire's capital, hundreds of miles away, no one truly sees them. Courtiers write poems about the strength of Qin Shi Huang. Scholars debate the shape of the frontier, but none of them feel the wind that howls through the teeth of winter. None of them carry stones with frostbitten fingers. Our builder does. And tomorrow he'll do it again. Because in the Empire, you don't stop working. You stop living. To speak of the Great Wall as if it were a single, unified structure is to speak in simplifications. What most people imagine when they picture the wall, those iconic gray bricks curling across misty mountains, is largely the legacy of the Ming dynasty built long after our nameless laborer laid his final stone. But for him, in the 3rd century BC under the Qin, the wall was something different. Cruder. Harsher. Less a symbol of power, more a desperate attempt to seal a fragile, newborn empire from chaos. In the early stages of construction, especially under Qin Shi Huang, the materials used depended heavily on geography. In mountainous regions, local stone was used, hewn directly from cliffs and valleys. In the lush plains, where earth is soft and dry, builders used a method called hangtu, layers of earth pounded down between wooden frames compacted until dense as rock. It took immense effort. Workers would lift heavy wooden pestles and drive them down hundreds of times in rhythm, turning loose soil into solid mass. There were no standard measurements. No centralized engineering manuals. One crew's section might be 5 meters high, another barely 3. Some sections included watchtowers, others didn't. In dry deserts, men mixed sand with reeds or crushed bone to add cohesion. In wetter climates, sections collapsed frequently from rain or frost. But this chaos wasn't due to incompetence, it was a result of urgency. The empire had just been unified. Its northern borders were under constant threat from nomadic tribes like the Xiongnu. There was no time for architectural elegance. The priority was speed and scale. Thousands were thrown at the frontier. No blueprint, just command, build. Our builder never saw the full span of what he was creating. His world was limited to the next basket of stone, the next patch of wall. But elsewhere, thousands of others did the same thing. And from the air, had anyone in that era possessed the means to look down from such heights, the wall would have looked like veins, branching across the mountains and deserts, pulsing with forced labor. Centuries passed. Dynasties rose and fell. The Han, who succeeded the Qin, continued to expand and modify the wall. Under the Han, fortresses and signal towers were added at strategic points. Flame and smoke became tools of long-distance communication, allowing border guards to signal invasion from hundreds of miles away in a matter of hours. Still, much of the wall remained earth-based, vulnerable, weathered, often rebuilt. Then came the Tang and Song dynasties, periods of economic and cultural flourishing. During these centuries, the wall was neglected, even abandoned in places. Trade and diplomacy, not fortifications, defined foreign policy. The labor camps were quiet for a time. The mountains grew over with grass. But the peace didn't last. By the time the Ming dynasty seized power in the 14th century, China faced renewed pressure from the north, this time from the Mongols, whose horseback armies had once ruled the entire country under the Yuan dynasty. The scars of that occupation were fresh. The Ming rulers did not forget. So they returned to the wall. But this time, they changed everything. Ming engineers built with stone and brick, fired, uniform, durable. They implemented centralized planning, using imperial maps and orders that detailed wall height, foundation depth, watchtower spacing, and garrison locations. Labor was still grueling, still dangerous, but it was no longer chaotic. It was systematized brutality. Entire provinces were mobilized. Soldiers, civilians, and convicts once again marched into the frontier. Ming records speak of millions involved in construction. Specialized kilns were built solely to produce bricks for the wall. Oxen carried stone from quarries dozens of miles away. The Ming Wall, unlike its predecessors, was not just a barrier, it was a statement. A monument to imperial will. One that could be seen from a distance and felt in every stone's weight. Our builder, long dead by now, buried in some forgotten trench, could never have imagined what his labor would become. He was just one of countless nameless hands in the foundational era, the ones who bore the cost of what others would later refine. And yet, in a strange twist of fate, his section of wall, the primitive, weather-beaten earthwork he helped build, may have lasted longer than many of the grander brick sections erected centuries later. Because even stone fades, bricks crumble, but the memory of that original effort, brutal and directionless as it was, laid the first shape of the legend. Today, tourists walk the most famous Ming sections, near Badaling or Jinshanling, posing for photos on the neat steps and sturdy towers. But few know how much of the wall lies in ruins, scattered across desolate hills and buried beneath sand. Even fewer know how many versions of the wall once existed. How many men, in how many centuries, bent their backs to a dream they would never see fulfilled. Because that's the truth of the Great Wall. It's not one wall. It's thousands of walls, layered, crisscrossed, abandoned, rebuilt. A palimpsest of labor and empire. And at the center of it all always is the worker, like our builder, standing under a freezing sky, lifting another stone with hands that no longer feel their own weight. He doesn't need to know how many miles it stretches. He doesn't care if historians call it a wonder of the world. He doesn't need a monument, because the wall itself is the monument. And his fingerprints are still there, if you know where to look. If this exploration of how stone, sweat, and centuries shape memory speaks to you, consider subscribing. This journey through time is far from over. Long after the last stones were set in place, the wall continued to shape life around it, not just for soldiers and emperors, but for the farmers, herders, traders, and families who lived in its shadow. To build the Great Wall was to divide space, to reshape a continent. And though its primary purpose was military, to keep invaders out, its presence became much more than a line of defense. It became a line of transformation. Our builder, years gone now, would never know the long-term consequences of what he helped construct. But for generations after him, the wall defined where people could live, trade, and travel. In some regions, entire villages sprang up just to support the construction process. These communities provided food, tools, animals, and basic services to feed the enormous logistical machine required to keep laborers alive. When construction ended, some of these settlements withered. Others evolved into permanent towns, frontier outposts that would become the lungs and arteries of Imperial China's edge. And then there were the garrisons. The soldiers stationed along the wall weren't part of a short-term deployment. In many cases, this was their life. They trained, patrolled, hunted, married, and died within sight of the stone towers. Some were born their children of earlier soldiers or settlers. The wall wasn't just a border. It was a home. Life for these troops was a strange mix of monotony and tension. On quiet days, patrols walked the ridges, scanning the northern horizon. Signal towers communicated via flags, smoke, fire, or mirrors. In some stretches, nothing happened for weeks. But in others, skirmishes were common, fast raids by nomadic horsemen probing the wall's weakest points. A soldier's life could shift from boredom to chaos in minutes. Most lived in modest barracks built into or beside the wall itself. These structures were cold, damp, and cramped. Firewood was scarce in the highlands, and winters bit with a hunger that no uniform could stop. Provisions came via long supply lines from the interior. Droughts or floods inland could mean hunger on the frontier. And when supplies ran thin, local civilians often suffered first, their grain taken by officials, their animals requisitioned for transport or food. This created a quiet but persistent resentment between the military and rural communities. In some regions, soldiers became bullies protected by imperial authority and hardened by isolation. In others, especially where soldiers married locals, a unique fusion emerged. Frontier families who spoke a blend of dialects, who passed down both farming skills and martial knowledge, who knew the wall not as a monument but as a background to everyday life. And then there was trade. Ironically, while the wall was meant to separate China from the barbarians of the north, it often facilitated the opposite. In the gaps between towers, during times of peace, nomadic traders would approach under flags of truce. They offered horses, animal skins, salt, wool. In return, they sought grain, silk, tea, and tools. These unofficial exchanges weren't always welcomed by officials, but they were tolerated, sometimes even encouraged, because they kept the border stable. Commerce, in its quiet way, did what armies could not. It built understanding. In some sectors, markets even sprang up just outside the wall. Tiny outposts where Mongols, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Chinese peasants bartered without formal recognition. 1,000 years before modern globalization, these makeshift trading points were early nodes of intercultural exchange. But it wasn't always peaceful. The wall was still a wall, a symbol of division. And when emperors changed, when treaties failed, or when famine pushed the steppe tribes southward, violence returned. Garrisons were overwhelmed. Villages burned. And always, the wall was rebuilt thicker, taller, longer. Its very presence reminded everyone of the empire's fear. And its ambition. The wall also served as a stage for internal control. Exile was a common punishment in imperial China, and the frontier became a place of banishment, not just for criminals, but for scholars, political dissidents, and disgraced officials. Some were sent to the wall to labor, others to command. Either way, the edge of the empire was also the edge of power, where those out of favor were sent to vanish. In literature and folklore, the wall came to symbolize both endurance and sorrow. Poets wrote of lovers separated by conscription. Mothers waited decades for sons who never returned. Stories spread of ghosts who wandered the battlements, searching for lost names. The wall became more than stone. It became myth, tragedy, national memory. And yet, for all that weight, it was also mundane. Children played beside its base. Shepherds led flocks across its broken ridges. Local farmers dug into its foundation to steal bricks for homes or wells. In some villages, it was just another hill, a place where weeds grew thick and snakes hid in shade. History is like that. What one generation calls a wonder, another calls a wall. And the people who live near it rarely have the luxury to admire it. But for us, looking back, the wall reveals 1,000 stories. Not of emperors and wars alone, but of families who survived under its shadow. Of soldiers who froze on watch. Of merchants who gambled with their lives. Of builders who, like the man we've been following, never knew the shape of what they were part of. They didn't need to. Because the wall, like history itself, was not built in understanding but in motion. In repetition. In the daily, anonymous labor of people whose names are lost but whose legacy stands, brick by brick, across the mountains. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe the human cost behind every monument deserves to be remembered, make sure to subscribe. We're not done yet. By the time the last imperial dynasty collapsed in 1912, the Great Wall had already outlived everything that created it. It stood weathered and broken, an ancient skeleton across the hills, forgotten in places, looted in others. The emperors who had demanded its construction were long gone, their palaces fallen to ruin, their decrees reduced to dust. But the wall remained not as a weapon but as a witness. The Qing dynasty, ruled by the Manchus, had little interest in maintaining it. They were not defending against the north, they were the north. Once they conquered Beijing in the 17th century and claimed the mandate of heaven, they absorbed what remained of the frontier into their empire. The wall, as a functional military line, lost its purpose. It was no longer needed. And like most things in decline, it began to decay. Bricks were pulled out for houses. Stones taken for wells and roads. Villagers dug into the wall's foundations to make pig pens or wine cellars. No army came to stop them. No scholar arrived to preserve it. The wall had become invisible, a relic no one cared to remember. But history has a strange way of resurrecting its monuments. In the 20th century, China was thrown into chaos. Warlords ruled the provinces. Foreign powers carved out influence. Civil war raged. The Japanese invaded. Through it all, the Great Wall, silent and scarred, remained where it had always been. In some places, Japanese soldiers even used the wall during their campaigns in northern China. Trenches were dug near it. Lookouts posted in ancient towers. The wall became part of modern warfare briefly and ironically centuries after it had ceased to matter strategically. But its true resurrection wouldn't come through war. It would come through myth. In the 1930s and 1940s, as Chinese nationalism grew in resistance to Japanese aggression, writers and politicians began to rediscover the wall not as a barrier but as a symbol. They spoke of the wall as a testament to Chinese perseverance, a monument to unity and ancient greatness. It was a poetic reinvention, far removed from the lived suffering of the laborers who once built it. After the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the Communist Party recognized the wall's potential. It wasn't just stone, it was narrative. It could be used to speak of strength, continuity, sacrifice, unity. And so, despite years of damage and neglect, sections of the wall began to be protected, reconstructed, glorified, but only some sections. Tourist-friendly areas like Badaling were rebuilt in the 1950s and 1980s, in part to impress foreign dignitaries, in part to promote national pride. These stretches are clean, wide, and monumental. Their stones look ancient but are often no older than the cement that holds them. Visitors walk those sections today thinking they see 2,000 years of history beneath their feet. What they often see instead is reconstruction, part reality, part theater. Meanwhile, thousands of miles of real wall crumble silently in deserts and forests, far from cameras, far from restoration budgets. Wild grass grows between their bricks. Shepherds lead goats along their tops. In some places, only a faint ridge in the land remains like a ghost pressed into the earth. Still, the myth lives on. The wall has become a national emblem printed on currency, textbooks, government posters. Chinese astronauts even brought photos of it into space. Ironically, one of the most famous myths is that the wall can be seen from the moon, a claim repeated so often that it's now a fixture of trivia despite being false. You can't see it with the naked eye from the moon. Not even close. But that doesn't matter. The myth is more powerful than the fact. In many ways, the wall has become a story about what people want to believe. For the government, it's a symbol of unity and strength. For tourists, it's a wonder of the world, something to be conquered with selfies and sun hats. For historians, it's a puzzle of timelines, styles, dynasties, and interpretations. And for those few who still live near its forgotten stretches, it's part of the landscape, old, cracked, and indifferent. But rarely do we speak of the laborers. Rarely do we remember the farmers dragged from their land. The criminals sentenced to build until their bodies broke. The thousands who died nameless in snow and sand, who bled into foundations that tourists now walk with ice cream in hand. Our builder, that single anonymous man whose day we followed, he has no statue. No plaque. No shrine. He exists in no textbook, no dynasty scroll. But his life mattered. His pain mattered. Because without him and the millions like him, there would be no wall. And in the end, maybe that's the most important truth. The Great Wall isn't just a marvel of stone. It's a monument to endurance. Not imperial endurance, human endurance. The kind that outlives kings. That survives exile. That builds with bleeding hands and does not stop until the work is done. Today, the wall stands not as proof of imperial might, but of the cost that might demands. It is, quite literally, a scar across the land. But scars speak. And this one whispers of forgotten days, frozen mornings, and footsteps lost in dust. If stories like these matter to you, the ones behind the monuments, the truths beneath the myths, don't just scroll past. Subscribe. Because history is not built by emperors. It's built by hands like his. And voices like ours. Time does not remember in detail. It remembers in outline, in symbol, in silence. The Great Wall of China, that serpentine giant twisting across half a continent, is one such memory. Not complete, not clean, but heavy with meaning. It has stood for over 2 millennia not because it was perfectly built, but because it was persistently rebuilt. Layer upon layer. Dynasty after dynasty. Life after life. And at the bottom of every layer was a builder. He was never meant to be remembered. He was one of thousands. Maybe one of millions. A man without a name in the official records. His bones, if they remain at all, are fused into earth, into mortar, into cracked stone. He never knew he was part of a wonder. He never stood atop the finished wall and looked down in pride. He just woke up, carried weight, followed orders, endured. That is the foundation of every monument history has ever praised. The truth is this: the wall is not great because it was grand. It is great because people who were never given the right to dream made it real. Because men who would never be painted or praised died stacking its bricks. Because their lives, as ordinary and grim as they were, touched something eternal. When we say the Great Wall, we speak with reverence. But what we rarely speak of is the cost, the scale of death, the lives consumed. Entire generations disappeared into the landscape for the sake of imperial paranoia and national myth-making. And still, through cruelty, the wall became something more than its intent. It became memory. But memory, like stone, can erode. It needs care. It needs truth. That's why stories like this matter. Not because they make us feel proud, but because they make us feel responsible. Because they remind us that history is not built by heroes alone, it is built by hands that never asked to hold a legacy. So when we visit the wall, or simply see its image in a book, in a classroom, on a screen, we should see more than stone. We should see the man we followed. The man who worked through snow and hunger. Who died without recognition? Who, in the quiet of a freezing dawn, lifted one more rock without knowing why and placed it in a wall that would never speak his name? He is the reason the wall still stands. Not the emperor who ordered it, not the generals who oversaw it, but the worker who obeyed, who endured, who suffered, and who, by some quiet miracle of repetition, helped carve a line into the earth that would last beyond dynasties, beyond ideology, beyond even memory itself. This is what the wall means. Not just defense, not just ambition, but the lives behind the stones, the breath between the bricks, the human weight of every so-called wonder. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to make one nameless day, lived in exhaustion and silence, worth remembering forever. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you see something old in a new light, then you already understand why history matters. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Because monuments may be silent, but stories aren't. And someone has to speak for those who couldn't.